The last thing I remember before everything went black was Nathan's boot connecting with my ribs, and I thought, this is how I die, so I grabbed his phone and called 911 myself. If this story shook you in the first 5 seconds, wait until you hear what happened next. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has traveled. Now stay with me until the very end, because what happened inside that hospital room changed everything. The morning it all started to unravel, I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror trying to cover a bruise the size of a grapefruit on my left cheekbone. My hands were shaking so badly that the makeup sponge kept slipping, and I remember staring at my own reflection thinking, who is this woman? I didn't recognize her. The woman looking back at me had hollow eyes, trembling fingers, and a jaw she kept clenched tight so she wouldn't make a sound. Because making a sound meant Nathan would hear her, and if Nathan heard her, he would come in, and if Nathan came in and saw her struggling to cover what he had done, he would do it again. Emily. His voice came from the bedroom, low and flat. That tone. I knew that tone the way you know the sound of thunder before a storm. You're taking too long. I pressed the sponge harder against my face. Almost done. I called back, and my voice came out steady. That was the one thing I had gotten good at in 3 years of marriage, making my voice sound steady when everything inside me was falling apart. I was 34 years old. I had a degree in graphic design. I had a mother who called me every Sunday, and a best friend named Carla who used to make me laugh until I cried. I had been once a person who smiled easily. But that morning, standing in the bathroom of the house Nathan and I shared in Denver, I was just trying to get through the next 60 seconds without making him angry. Emily! Louder this time. I'm coming! I set the sponge down, looked at myself one last time. The bruise was still visible if you knew where to look. I decided I wouldn't let anyone get that close. I walked out into the bedroom, and Nathan was sitting on the edge of the bed already dressed, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes polished. He looked like a man who had never raised his hand to anyone in his life. That was the part that used to destroy me, how normal he looked, how completely, utterly normal. He glanced at me the way you glance at furniture you're deciding whether to replace. You look tired, he said. I didn't sleep well. Whose fault is that? I didn't answer. I learned a long time ago that answering questions like that only made things worse. I walked to the closet and started getting dressed, keeping my back to him, keeping my breathing even. I need you to pick up my dry cleaning today, he said. And don't forget dinner. Last time you let the chicken go dry. I won't forget. You said that last time too. I pulled my blouse on and turned around, and he was watching me with that flat, assessing look. My heart was hammering. It always hammered like this in the mornings, this constant, low-level dread that sat right behind my sternum like a stone. I had woken up with it for so long, I almost couldn't remember what it felt like to wake up without it. I'll make sure it's right, I said. He held my gaze for a moment, one of those moments where I never knew which way it was going to go, and then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked past me without another word. I heard him go down the stairs, heard the front door open and close. I heard his car start in the driveway, and I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my chest for days. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My ribs ached where he had kicked me 2 nights ago. Deep bone bruise aching that flared every time I breathed too deeply. I had been telling myself it wasn't serious. I had been telling myself a lot of things for a very long time. I want to tell you something about the beginning, because I think people on the outside always wonder how someone ends up in a situation like mine. They think they would have left after the first incident. They think they would have known. I used to think that too. When I met Nathan, I was 30 years old and freshly out of a 2-year relationship that had ended badly. My confidence was low. My mother kept telling me I was too picky. My friends were getting married one by one, and at every wedding I went to, I sat in the back and felt the particular loneliness of someone who cannot figure out what they are doing wrong. And then I went to my college friend Dana's wedding, and I saw Nathan standing near the bar, laughing at something someone had said, and he was handsome in a way that felt almost unfair. Dark hair, broad shoulders, a smile that reached his eyes. He noticed me noticing him. He walked over. "You look like you're deciding whether this wedding is worth the dress you wore for it," he said. I laughed. I actually laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone doing the same calculation." He handed me a glass of wine. "Nathan Calloway. Emily Marsh." We talked for 3 hours straight. He asked about my work and actually listened to my answers. He remembered things I said earlier in the conversation and came back to them. He made me feel in the span of one evening like the most interesting person in the room. I drove home that night thinking I had been wrong to stop believing in things like this. We dated for 2 years. The entire 2 years were good, or at least I told myself they were good. Looking back, I can see the moments I explained away. The time he got quietly furious when I was 20 minutes late to meet him and didn't speak to me for the rest of the dinner, and I spent the whole night apologizing without fully understanding what I was apologizing for. The time I made a joke at his expense in front of friends, a gentle, affectionate joke, and he laughed along with everyone else. But in the car afterward, his voice dropped to a register that made my skin go cold. "Don't ever do that again," he said. And I nodded. And I told myself he just didn't like being teased, that it was a quirk, that everyone had quirks. We got married on a Saturday in June outdoors with string lights and sunflowers, and my mother crying happy tears in the front row. In the photos from that day, I look radiant. I was radiant. I believed completely and entirely that I was walking into the best chapter of my life. The first time he hit me, we had been married for 4 months. It was over something so small that I feel almost embarrassed to say it. I had forgotten to buy coffee at the grocery store. That was it. I came home with the bags and he started unpacking them, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something cold and coiled. "Where's the coffee?" My stomach dropped. I forgot. I'm sorry. I can go back." He moved so fast I didn't have time to react. His hand caught me across the face, not a full swing, but a sharp, hard slap, and the sound of it was almost louder than the impact. I stumbled backward into the counter. My ears were ringing. For a full 10 seconds, neither of us moved. Then Nathan put the grocery bag down very carefully on the counter and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there with my hand pressed to my face, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Because it didn't make sense. Nathan didn't do things like this. Nathan was kind and funny and he loved me. This was a mistake. This was an aberration. This would never happen again. He came back into the kitchen 20 minutes later. His eyes were red. He looked like a man who had just had the worst moment of his life. "Emily." His voice broke. "I don't know what happened. I swear to you, I don't know what came over me. I have never done anything like that in my life." He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, because I was still in shock, and because part of me needed to believe what he was saying. "I am so, so sorry. I love you. I will never do that again. Please tell me you believe me." I believed him. That is the part of the story that is hardest to explain to someone who has never lived it. I believed him not because I was stupid or weak or naive. I believed him because I was in love with him, and because he had never done it before, and because every piece of him that I knew, the man who called me from work just to hear my voice, the man who remembered my coffee order and left it on the counter when I had a hard day, the man who danced with my mother at our wedding and made her laugh, that man was telling me with his whole chest that this was a mistake, that it would never happen again. It happened again 6 weeks later, and then 3 weeks after that, and then twice in 1 week. And somewhere in the accumulation of those incidents, the apologies started to change. They became shorter, less specific, less remorseful, and more explanatory. I wouldn't have reacted that way if you hadn't pushed me. You know how stressed I am at work. If you just thought before you spoke, "Emily, this wouldn't happen." And I started believing those explanations too, because it was easier than the alternative. By the time I had been married 2 years, I had reorganized my entire life around Nathan's moods. I checked his face the moment he walked in the door each evening. I learned to read the set of his shoulders, the way he held his jaw, the particular quality of his silence. A good day meant he was tired but calm. A bad day meant I spent the next several hours in a state of hypervigilance so acute that sometimes I couldn't eat. I stopped calling Carla because Nathan had made it clear he didn't like her. She's a bad influence, she makes you mouthy. And after enough repetition, I started to believe that Carla was the problem. I stopped visiting my mother as often because going home meant coming back to questions about why I seemed quieter than I used to be, and I didn't have answers I was willing to give. I made my world smaller and smaller until Nathan filled all of it. I want to tell you about the Tuesday about 6 months before the night that broke everything open when I was sitting at the kitchen table doing freelance work, and my phone buzzed with a message from an old colleague, a woman named Priya, who I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. She had seen some of my work online and wanted to refer a client to me. A real client, a substantial project, something that would have meant real money and real momentum in a career I had let go almost entirely dark. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I heard Nathan's car in the driveway. I put my phone face down on the table. I told myself I would answer Priya later. But when Nathan came in and I heard the way he dropped his keys on the counter, hard not tossed, I knew that later was not going to be a gentle evening. I put my phone in my purse and I started dinner. And I did not think about Priya or the client or the career I used to have. I thought about chicken temperature and whether I had remembered to buy the right wine and whether I had set the table the way he liked it. I never answered Priya's message. That is what 3 years of living in fear does to you. It doesn't just hurt your body. It amputates your sense of what is possible. It convinces you piece by piece that the person you were before is someone you invented, someone who didn't really exist, because the person you are now is too small and too frightened to have ever been anything else. The night of the argument over dinner, the night that ended with me in the backseat of Nathan's car, and the world going in and out like a flickering light, it started as it almost always did, over nothing. I had made roast chicken. I had been careful. I had used a meat thermometer. I had set the table correctly. I had poured his wine before he sat down. I had done every single thing right, the way you learn to do every single thing right when doing something wrong means pain. He cut into the chicken chewed once and set his fork down. My blood went cold. Emily, that voice. What's wrong? What's wrong? He repeated slowly, like he was tasting the absurdity of the question. It's dry. I looked at my own plate. The chicken looked fine. The chicken was fine. I had been careful. I used the thermometer, Nathan. I checked it. Don't argue with me. I'm not arguing. I'm just telling you that He stood up. And when Nathan stood up at the dinner table, that was never just standing up. It was a physical statement, a renegotiation of the terms of the room. You know what your problem is, he said. You never just admit when you're wrong. You always have to justify yourself. You always have to make it about you. I'm not making it about me. I'm trying to explain. Stop talking. He picked up his plate and carried it to the sink. I'll eat later, after I've had time to deal with the disappointment. Something happened to me in that moment that had never happened before. I felt something move in my chest, not fear, not the usual cold dread, but something hotter and more dangerous. I felt anger, real live, unmanageable anger, and before the part of my brain that had learned caution could stop the part that had simply had enough, I said, "It isn't dry, Nathan. You're wrong." The kitchen went absolutely silent. He turned from the sink very slowly. "What did you just say to me?" I should have walked it back. I knew in the split second between his question and my answer that I should have walked it back, apologized, made myself smaller, made myself nothing. I knew it the way I knew my own name, but something in me was done with knowing it. I said, "You're wrong," I said. "The chicken is fine. I was careful. I am always careful. And it is never enough, and I am—" My voice cracked. "I am so tired." What happened next happened very fast. The first blow caught me on the side of the head. I hit the wall, then the floor. He was saying something. I could hear his voice above me, but I couldn't make out the words anymore. Everything was distorted, like trying to listen underwater. I remember trying to get up and not being able to. I remember the cold of the kitchen tile against my face. I remember thinking very clearly and very calmly in the way you sometimes think clearly in the worst moments. If I don't get out of this house, I'm going to die in it. And then everything went dark. When I came back to consciousness, the first thing I felt was motion. The car was moving. I was lying across the back seat, my cheek pressed against the leather, and every bump in the road sent a white-hot bolt of pain through my left side, so sharp it stole my breath. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I lay there and I listened, and the first thing I heard was Nathan's voice from the front seat, tight and controlled the way it always got when he was managing a situation he had caused. "She fell down the stairs," he was saying to someone, I realized. After a moment he was rehearsing, talking to himself, working out the details. "She fell. I was in the other room. I heard the crash and I found her at the bottom." A pause. "No, that's too much detail. Keep it simple. She fell down the stairs. I brought her in right away." I kept my eyes closed. I kept my breathing shallow. My ribs screamed every time the car hit a bump, but I did not move because if Nathan knew I was conscious, I didn't know what he would do, and I had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous version of Nathan was the version that felt cornered. "She's clumsy," he muttered to himself. "Everyone knows she's clumsy." I felt something shift in me in that moment, something quiet and final, like a door closing somewhere deep in my chest. Because he was right about one thing, everyone did know I was clumsy. Because I had told them that. Because every time I showed up somewhere with a bruise, I had explained it away with a laugh and a shrug, and, "You know me, I walked into another door." I had handed him that story. I had gift-wrapped it and handed it to him. And now he was sitting in the front seat of his car, driving me to the hospital and using my own lie to cover what he had done to me. I thought not this time. I didn't know yet exactly what not this time meant. I was in pain so serious that I couldn't think clearly. My head was throbbing with a pressure that scared me. But that thought held. Not this time. I locked it inside my chest like a small, hard stone, and I held it there, and I did not let go of it. Nathan pulled into the hospital. Drop-off got out of the car, opened the back door. "Emily." He touched my shoulder, and even that light contact made me flinch. "Can you hear me? We're at the hospital. Can you sit up?" I opened my eyes. I looked at him. His face was doing something complicated. There was fear there, genuine fear, but it wasn't the fear of a man worried about the woman he loved. It was the fear of a man calculating risk. "I can hear you," I said. My voice came out wrong, too thin, stretched too tight. "Good." He helped me sit up, and when I gasped from the pain in my ribs, he tightened his grip on my arm not gently. "Listen to me. You fell down the stairs. That's what happened. Do you understand me?" I looked at his face. I looked at it for a long moment. "I understand you," I said. He watched me for one more second, checking, and then he seemed satisfied. He helped me out of the car, and we walked through the emergency entrance together, his arm around my shoulders, looking for all the world like a worried husband supporting an injured wife. At the intake desk, a young woman in scrubs looked up, and her eyes moved over me quickly in the professional way medical people have cataloging assessing. "What happened?" she asked. "She fell down the stairs," Nathan said. "I found her at the bottom. She was unconscious for, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. I brought her right away." The intake nurse looked at me. "Is that right, ma'am? Can you confirm that for me?" Nathan's hand tightened on my shoulder, not hard enough to be visible, just hard enough to be felt. A reminder, an instruction. "I fell," I said. They brought out a wheelchair and took me back. Nathan started to follow, and the nurse stopped him professionally, pleasantly. "We'll come get you once she's been assessed. You can wait right here." I watched Nathan's face as they wheeled me away from him. He was smiling at the nurse, nodding, already composing himself into the role of the concerned husband, waiting anxiously in the lobby. But his eyes followed me all the way through the doors. Even as the doors swung shut between us, I felt those eyes. The exam room was small and bright. A doctor came in quickly. Dr. Marcus Webb, according to his name badge, a man in his late 40s with a calm, unhurried way of moving that I found myself anchoring to almost immediately. He introduced himself, pulled on gloves, and began his examination without any preamble. He was quiet for a long time. He checked my head, my eyes, my neck. He pressed carefully along my ribs, and I couldn't fully muffle the sound I made when he hit the right spot. "Those are fractured," he said. Not as a question. I fell. He didn't respond to that. He kept examining, and his silence had a quality to it that was different from Nathan's silence. Nathan's silence was pressure, a weight you had to constantly work to lift. Dr. Webb's silence felt like something being held carefully open, a space being kept for something that hadn't been said yet. He stepped back. He looked at me. He said quietly and directly, "I've been doing this for 22 years. I know what a fall looks like, and I know what this looks like, and these are two different things." My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. "I fell," I said again. "Okay," he said. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just held my gaze with an expression that was steady and completely without judgment. "I'm going to send you for imaging. And while you're here, I'm going to ask our social worker to come speak with you. Her name is Diane. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say." He paused. "But I want you to know that whatever happened to bring you here tonight, you are safe in this building." Something cracked open in my chest at those words. Something I had been keeping sealed for so long that I had forgotten it was there. I pressed my lips together hard. I was not going to cry in front of this doctor. I was not going to fall apart right here. "I fell down the stairs," I said, and my voice only wavered slightly. Dr. Webb nodded once. "I'll be back after imaging." When they took me for the CT scan, one of the radiology technicians was a woman not much older than me, with dark hair pulled back and a small silver cross at her throat. She helped me shift positions with a gentleness that made me want to cry all over again. At one point, as she was adjusting the positioning, she leaned slightly closer to me and said in a voice low enough that no one else in the room could have heard it, "Honey, you don't have to protect him." I stared at the ceiling. My eyes burned. "I'm not protecting anyone," I said. She didn't say anything else. But when she helped me back into the wheelchair, she squeezed my hand once briefly, and the warmth of that small human contact hit me so hard that I had to clench my jaw to keep from breaking down completely. Back in the exam room, the waiting was the worst part, because waiting meant my mind could work, and my mind went straight to Nathan sitting out in that lobby and what he was going to do when we got home, because there was going to be a when we got home. That was the thing no one seemed to understand. From the outside, there was always a going home. There was always a next time. You didn't just walk out of an emergency room into a free life. You walked out of an emergency room and back into the same house and the same man and the same cycle, except now there would also be the added fact that you had been somewhere public, and the risk of him feeling exposed and humiliated would make him more dangerous, not less. The door opened and a woman came in. She was maybe 50, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of expression that was warm without being soft. "Emily, I'm Diane Holloway. I'm the hospital social worker." She sat down across from me without any of the hovering, uncertain energy I had expected. She simply sat down and looked at me like I was a person she was genuinely glad to meet. "I'm not here to get you in trouble or make any decisions for you. I just want to talk." "My husband already told you what happened," I said. "Your husband told the intake desk what happened," she said. "I'm asking you." I looked at my hands in my lap, my hands that were still even now trembling faintly. "I fell down the stairs." "Okay." She didn't blink. "Can I tell you something, Emily? I've talked to a lot of women in this room over the years, and the ones who tell me they fell, almost all of them are protecting someone. And almost all of them later tell me they wish they had said something sooner. Not all of them, but almost all." She paused. "That's all I want to say about that." The silence stretched between us. "He rehearsed it," I said. I don't know why I said it. I don't know what switch flipped in that particular second. But the words came out of me before I could stop them, like something that had been under pressure for a very long time, finally finding a crack. Diane's expression didn't change dramatically. She just went very still, the way a person does when they understand that something important is happening and they don't want to do anything to interrupt it. "I was conscious in the car," I said. "I woke up and I kept my eyes closed, and he was rehearsing it. He was practicing what to say. The stairs. How long I was unconscious. The words." My voice was shaking now. "He was rehearsing his story the whole drive here." Diane leaned forward slightly. "Emily, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What you just told me matters. And what happened to your ribs, to your face, what shows up on your imaging that matters. But the only thing that matters most right now is what you want to do." She held my gaze. "So I'm going to ask you directly. Is there anything you want to tell me about how you got hurt tonight?" The stone I had been holding in my chest since the car, that small hard knot this time, pressed outward against my ribs, and my ribs were already fractured, and the pressure of it hurt, and I thought about 3 years. I thought about the woman in the bathroom mirror that morning who didn't recognize herself. I thought about Priya's message I never answered. I thought about Carla, who I hadn't called in 2 years. I thought about my mother, and the careful, worried way she had been looking at me every time she saw me, the questions she never quite finished asking, and the way I had become very good at finishing them for her, with a smile and a story that sent her away satisfied and left me hollowed out. I thought about Nathan's boot, about the kitchen floor, about coming to in the back seat of his car and hearing him practice his lie, and the particular cold clarity of understanding in that moment that to him I was a problem to be managed. "My husband did this," I said. My voice, when I finally said it, was smaller than I wanted it to be, but it was steady, and it was the truest thing I had said to another human being in 3 years. Diane put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything dramatic. She didn't say, "I knew it," or "I'm so sorry," or "you poor thing." She just put her hand over mine and said quietly and firmly, "You're safe. Right now in this room, you are safe. And I am not going to let anything happen to you tonight." I broke. I don't mean I cried attractively the way women cry in movies. I mean I broke ugly and gasping and shaking from somewhere so deep in my body that it felt almost physical, like something structural coming loose. I pressed both hands over my face, and I cried with the kind of grief that comes from 3 years of compressed silence finally breaking the container it was kept in. Diane kept her hand on my arm, and she didn't try to stop me, and she didn't tell me to calm down, and she didn't look at the door. She just sat there and let it happen, and the grace of that, the simple human grace of someone letting me be a disaster without trying to fix it or minimize it, was the most healing thing anyone had done for me in longer than I could remember. When I finally surfaced, my face was soaked, and my ribs were screaming, and I felt like I had just swum across something vast and cold and come out the other side. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Diane said carefully, "I'm going to ask you some more questions, and then with your permission, I'm going to involve the police liaison who works with our department, and then we're going to talk about what your options are, all of your options, and you're going to decide what you want to do." She looked at me steadily. "This is your choice, Emily. Every step is your choice. But I want you to know there are people in this building who are on your side, and we have been since the moment you came in." I thought about Nathan in the lobby. I thought about him sitting there in his perfectly knotted tie, performing worried husband for anyone who happened to look his way. I thought about the fact that he had been so certain I would say what he told me to say, that he had barely even bothered to make the instructions sound like a request. He had said you fell down the stairs, and he had expected me to carry that story to my grave because I always had before, and there was absolutely no version of his calculation in which I was sitting in this room right now telling the truth. "Tell me what to do," I said. "Tell me what I need to say." Diane squeezed my hand once. "Just tell me the truth. That's all you have to do." The door to the exam room opened a few inches, and Dr. Webb leaned in. He looked at my face, read whatever was written on it, and something in his expression shifted, not into surprise, but into a kind of quiet, professional relief. "Imaging is back," he said. He was looking at me, not Diane, when he said 3 fractured ribs, mild concussion, bruising consistent with blunt force trauma. Multiple incidents, not all of them recent. Not all of them recent. Not all of them recent. Those words landed on me like an indictment, and in a way they were not an indictment of me, but of everything I had normalized, everything I had explained away, every time I had stood in front of a mirror covering something up and told myself it wasn't that bad. The doctor was looking at my body from the outside, and what he was seeing was a record, a documented medical, irrefutable record of 3 years. "What does that mean?" I asked, even though I already knew. Dr. Webb came fully into the room and closed the door. It means that what happened to you tonight didn't happen in isolation, and it means that you need more support than just medical care. He paused. Are you ready to accept that support? I looked at the wall. I thought about the front lobby. I thought about Nathan's hand on my shoulder in the car, not gently. Then I thought about the radiology technician's hand on mine, about Diane's hand on mine, about all the hands that had touched me tonight that weren't trying to hurt me or control me or keep me quiet, and how shocking that simple contrast was, how it exposed, just by existing, how long I had gone without it. Yes, I said, I'm ready. What happened in the next hour moved faster than anything in the past 3 years of my life. A police officer, a woman named Officer Sandra Perez, compact and direct, with a notepad and a manner that was professional without being cold, came in and sat across from me. I told her everything, not just tonight, everything. 3 years, in 40 minutes, all of it coming out of me in a rush that I couldn't have stopped even if I'd wanted to. The dates I remembered, the incidents I remembered, the ones I could prove and the ones I couldn't. She wrote without interrupting, and when I finished, she looked up and said, "You did the right thing." I almost laughed, not because it wasn't true, but because doing the right thing had felt for so long, like something entirely out of my reach, something people in better circumstances than mine got to do. And here I was doing it in a hospital gown with 3 fractured ribs, and somehow it was the most agency I had felt in years. "What about Nathan?" I asked. "He's in the lobby right now." Officer Perez looked at me steadily. "He won't be for much longer." Nathan was arrested in the hospital lobby. I was not there when it happened, but Officer Perez told me about it afterward, and I have played it in my mind more times than I can count. He was arrested in the lobby of the hospital where he had brought me, expecting me to lie for him. He was arrested while still wearing the concerned husband face he had been constructing all evening. When Diane came back to tell me he had been taken into custody, I sat very still for a moment. I waited to feel something clean and simple: relief, triumph, vindication. Instead, what I felt was more complicated and harder to name. Something like grief, but for the version of him I had invented and married. Something like fear, but not the old fear. A newer, stranger fear, the fear of what came next, of a future that had no Nathan in it, and therefore no map I knew how to read. And underneath all of that, so quiet, it was almost inaudible, something that might have been the very first breath of freedom. Not the full feeling of it yet, just the first small breath. I sat in that hospital room with Diane, while outside the building, the world rearranged itself into something I didn't yet have a name for, and I thought for the first time in 3 years about Priya's message. About the client I had never followed up on. About Carla and the sound of her laugh, and the way she always called me her best person when she was feeling sentimental. About my mother and all the questions she had never finished asking. I thought maybe I can call them back. Maybe I can call all of them back. Maybe it isn't too late. Diane stayed with me until almost midnight. She sat in that chair beside my hospital bed with the quiet steadiness of someone who had done this many times before and had never once let it become routine, and I was grateful for that, for the sense that my particular crisis mattered to her, that I wasn't just a file or a case number or a box to be checked before she went home. At some point, a nurse brought me a cup of tea I didn't ask for, and a blanket that smelled like industrial detergent and was somehow still the most comforting thing I had felt in years. "You're going to need somewhere to stay tonight," Diane said. "The hospital has a relationship with a women's shelter about 4 miles from here. It's safe, it's staffed around the clock, and I can have a bed arranged for you within the hour." I looked at my hands around the cup of tea. A shelter. The word landed differently than I expected. Part of me, the part that had spent 3 years telling itself that things weren't that bad, that other people had it worse, that the word abuse was too large and too serious for what was happening to me, that part wanted to resist it. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not in that kind of situation. But then I thought about the fractured ribs and the concussion and 3 years of documented bruises that weren't all recent, and I understood that whatever kind of person I had been telling myself I was, the facts disagreed. "Okay," I said. "Yes, A shelter. Diane nodded like I had said something brave, and maybe I had. Is there anyone you want to call tonight? Family, a friend? Carla's name came to me immediately and so strongly that it almost hurt. Carla, who I had let Nathan push out of my life piece by piece. Carla, who had texted me 11 months ago, a message I had never answered that simply said, "Emily, I don't know what's happening with you, but I love you, and I'm here whenever you're ready." I had read that text standing in Nathan's kitchen, and I had deleted it before he could see it, and I had spent the next week feeling like I had amputated something necessary from my own body. "There's someone," I said. "I don't know if she'll answer." Diane handed me a phone. "Try." It rang 3 times. Then Carla's voice, thick with sleep, confused, a little alarmed the way anyone is when their phone rings at midnight. "Hello. Who is this?" "It's Emily." A pause. 1 beat, 2, 3. Then Emily. Her voice changed completely. All the sleep went out of it. "Emily, where are you? Are you okay?" I opened my mouth to say yes automatically, the way I had been saying yes for 3 years to everyone who asked that question. And then I stopped. And I said, "No, I'm not okay. I'm at the hospital and I need you." She was already moving before I finished the sentence. I could hear it, the sound of her getting up, the rustle of her, doing 2 things at once. "Which hospital? What happened? Are you hurt?" "St. Luke's. I have some broken ribs. I'll explain everything when you get here." "Carla." My voice broke apart on her name. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I disappeared on you." "Stop," she said firmly. "Don't you dare apologize to me right now. I'm on my way. 30 minutes. Don't go anywhere." She hung up. I held the phone for a moment after the call ended, and I felt something shift in the room, something atmospheric like pressure changing before weather. 30 minutes. Carla was coming. Someone who knew me, the real me, the me that existed before Nathan was coming, and she hadn't hesitated for a single second. Diane was watching me with that steady, warm expression. "Good," she said simply. Carla arrived in 24 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall the whole time she was driving, watching the minutes tick past with a concentration that felt almost obsessive, as if the numbers were the only thing keeping me tethered. When the door opened and she walked in, Carla with her wild, dark, curly hair half loose and her coat thrown on over what was clearly her pajama top, and her eyes immediately finding me across the room and filling up, I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as recognition, like a part of me that had been held underwater for 3 years suddenly breaking the surface. She crossed the room in 4 steps and wrapped her arms around me carefully, and even careful was too much for my ribs, but I didn't say a word because I was not letting go of her for anything. "I've got you," she said into my hair. "I've got you, Emily. I've got you." I cried again. The second time in one night, after 3 years of training myself not to. After Carla had been in there about 10 minutes after the first wave of it passed, and we were just sitting together with her holding my hand, she looked at me with an expression that was equal parts heartbreak and something harder, something that had clearly been building in her for a long time. "How long?" she asked. I knew exactly what she was asking. "Since about 4 months after the wedding." She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet and fierce at the same time. 3 years. 3 years. Emily. She said my name like it was both a question and an answer. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I kept believing it would stop," I said. And then, after long enough, I started believing it was my fault. And then after longer than that, I couldn't remember how to tell the truth about it anymore, because I'd told the lie so many times, it had become the only story I knew how to tell. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I noticed. I need you to know that I noticed, and I kept trying to find a way in, and you kept closing every door I tried, and I was terrified I was going to lose you and not know how." I thought about her last text. "I love you, and I'm here whenever you're ready." I had deleted it to protect myself from Nathan. I had deleted it, and she had still come. She had still answered at midnight and been here in 24 minutes. That kind of love, the kind that outlasts silence and closed doors and years of absence, I had almost let Nathan convince me I didn't deserve. Diane arranged the shelter transport and Carla came with me. The shelter was a nondescript building on a quiet street, and the woman who met us at the door was brisk and kind and showed me to a small room with a narrow bed and a window and a lock on the door that I controlled. She handed me the key. I stood there looking at it, just a regular key, nothing remarkable, and felt the strangest thing. Power. A small, specific, completely unfamiliar power. This lock was mine. This door was mine. No one was going to open it tonight unless I said so. "Lock it when you go to sleep," the woman said, not unkindly. "Not because you need to, just because you can." I locked it that night. I locked it, and I lay in the narrow bed and listened to the quiet, and the quiet was different from the quiet in Nathan's house. Nathan's quiet always had weight to it. It was full of his potential, his mood, the constant possibility of something about to happen. This quiet was just quiet, empty and still and mine. I didn't sleep much. My ribs hurt too badly for sleep to fully take hold, and every time I drifted, something would jolt me back, a sound in the hallway, the distant click of a door, the reflex that had been trained into me so deeply that my nervous system didn't yet know it could stand down. But I lay there in the dark, and I breathed carefully around my fractured ribs, and I thought about what came next. What came next arrived the following morning in the form of a phone call from Officer Perez. Nathan had been arraigned. He was being held on a charge of aggravated assault, and the district attorney's office was reviewing the medical records and the photos the hospital had taken and the statement I had given. Officer Perez's voice was professional and careful, but underneath it, I could hear something that sounded like quiet satisfaction. "There's more," she said, and something in her tone made me sit up straighter despite the pain it caused. "When we took Mr. Calloway into custody last night, we conducted a standard inventory of his personal effects." A pause. "We found something in his wallet. A business card for a private attorney, a defense attorney, not someone you call if you haven't done this before." I went very still. "He had an attorney's card ready," I said. "Already in his wallet, pre-selected." She let that land. "Emily, this is consistent with a pattern. This is consistent with a man who has considered the possibility of being arrested before and prepared for it. That matters to the case." Another pause. "I need to ask you something difficult. Is there any possibility that you're not the first?" The question hit me like something physical. Not the first. I had never, in 3 years of living inside what Nathan was doing to me, thought to ask whether there was a before, whether there was another woman somewhere who had stood in another bathroom covering another bruise and believed another apology. The thought made me sick in a way that had nothing to do with my concussion. "I don't know," I said. "I don't know anything about before me." "We're going to look into it," she said. "In the meantime, the DA is going to reach out to you about your victim statement. Is this number the best way to reach you?" I looked around the small room at the shelter. I had no phone of my own. Nathan had controlled our phone plan, and I had surrendered my device along with so much else. I was using a phone the shelter had provided. "Yes," I said. "This number." After I hung up, I sat for a long time doing nothing, not thinking exactly, processing, running the new information against everything I thought I knew, and watching it change shape. The attorney's card, pre-selected. I had spent 3 years telling myself that what was happening to me was a private catastrophe, something unique and terrible and mine alone. And now, here was this small rectangular piece of evidence suggesting that Nathan had done this before or had planned to do it to me long enough in advance to prepare an exit strategy. Neither option was comforting. Carla came by at 10 that morning with coffee and a bag of things she had picked up, basic clothes, toiletries, a phone charger that fit a phone she'd brought for me to borrow. She set everything down and handed me the coffee without a word and sat across from me, and for a few minutes we were just 2 people drinking coffee in a quiet room. Then she said, "I called your mother." I looked up sharply. "Carla, she needed to know Emily. I know you're going to be angry at me, and that's fine, but she needed to know, and I wasn't going to let her not know." She held my gaze steadily. "She's driving up from Colorado Springs right now. She'll be here by noon." I set my coffee down. I wanted to be angry. I worked up the shape of it, the familiar defense. This is my situation, my choice, my timeline. But the truth was under the resistance. There was something enormous and relieved. My mother. My mother was coming. And I had spent 3 years keeping her at a careful distance because I couldn't let her see what my life had become, which meant I had spent 3 years missing her in a way I had refused to name even to myself. "She's going to want to know everything," I said. "Yes," Carla said, "and you're going to tell her." My mother arrived at 11:47. I know because I was watching the door the same way I had watched the clock the night before. She came in small and determined and took one look at my face, all of it. The bruise I was no longer covering, the fracture careful way I was holding myself. And her face did something I had never seen it do before. It collapsed and reconstructed itself in about 2 seconds, the way a person's face does when they receive news they were already afraid of receiving and have been quietly preparing for without admitting it. She crossed the room and held my face in both her hands, the way she had when I was small, and she looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said, "How long?" And I told her. The same way I had told Diane, the same way I had told Officer Perez, the same way I had told the truth over and over in the past 18 hours, each time a little easier, each time a little more like reclaiming something rather than losing it. When I finished, my mother sat down and was quiet for a moment that felt very long. Then she said in a voice that was absolutely steady and absolutely terrifying in its steadiness, "I am going to make sure he never touches you again." "Mom, I mean legally," she said. "I'm calling my attorney today. Whatever the district attorney doesn't cover, we cover ourselves. I want a restraining order. I want full documentation of everything. I want this man to spend the rest of his life understanding that what he did has consequences." She paused. "And I want you home, not permanently if you don't want that. But for now, I want you where I can see you." I thought about going home, about my mother's house in Colorado Springs, the kitchen that always smelled like whatever she was baking, the back bedroom, with the yellow curtains that she had kept exactly the same since I left for college, as if she knew I would need it again someday. I thought about waking up in that room without the stone in my chest, without listening for footsteps, without calibrating every breath against what mood the house was in. My eyes filled up again. I seemed to have an apparently inexhaustible supply of tears today. "I want that too," I said. That afternoon, my mother's attorney, a woman named Patricia Cho, who had a voice like a door closing firmly and a reputation my mother described as terrifying in the best possible way, called me at the shelter. She walked me through everything: the temporary protective order she was filing that afternoon, the civil case that would run parallel to the criminal prosecution, the financial steps I needed to take immediately to separate myself from Nathan's accounts. It was a lot of information delivered quickly, and I sat on the edge of the narrow shelter bed with a borrowed pen and the back of a shelter pamphlet writing down every word. At one point she paused and said, "Emily, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Did Nathan ever at any point during your marriage show you where he kept important documents, financial accounts, deeds, anything like that?" I thought about it. Nathan had always kept his financial life locked literally in a locked drawer in his home office that I had never been invited to access. But there was one night about a year into our marriage when he had been drinking and in an expansive mood and had shown me with a kind of proprietary pride a safety deposit box key he kept in his watch box. "For emergencies," he had said. "Everything important is in there." And then the mood had shifted, and he had put the key away, and we had never spoken about it again. I told Patricia Cho about the key. There was a pause on her end that had a very particular quality, the quality of someone reassessing something upward. "That's important," she said, and her already crisp voice sharpened by another degree. "Don't mention that to anyone else yet. I'll walk you through why that matters later, but for now, don't mention it." I said I wouldn't. I hung up and sat with that instruction and the particular weight of it. The key. Whatever was in that box, and I had a gathering sense that it was something significant, something beyond the legal documents you kept for emergencies. It was going to matter. I could feel it the way you sometimes feel the shape of something in the dark before you can see it clearly. That evening, as my mother and Carla sat with me in the shelter common room, and the three of us ate takeout Chinese food from containers and talked about things both important and completely ordinary. My borrowed phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't read it. Then I did. It said, "Emily. This is Marcus Webb. Dr. Webb from last night. I know this may be inappropriate to contact you directly, and I apologize for that. But something came up in our review today that you need to know about. When you're ready to talk, please call me. It's urgent. I read it twice." Then I showed it to my mother, who read it, and looked up at me with an expression I couldn't fully decode. "Call him," she said. I called him right there at the table with the takeout containers pushed aside, and Carla holding my hand, and my mother watching me with that steadfast, terrible composure that she had been holding together all day for my sake. Dr. Webb answered on the second ring. "Emily," he said, "thank you for calling. I'll be direct because I think you deserve that." A pause. "When I reviewed your imaging today with our department head, a standard review we do for all trauma cases we flag, he recognized some of the older injury patterns. Not from any clinical record of yours, because you've never been treated here before." Another pause longer this time. "He recognized them because he treated a woman with almost identical injury presentation 14 months ago. Same type of fractures, same pattern, same age range." His voice was careful and measured. "Her name was Rebecca Calloway. She was Nathan's first wife." I felt the room tilt. I put my hand flat on the table to steady myself. Rebecca Calloway. Nathan had a first wife. Nathan, who had told me when we met that he had never been married, had never been close, that he was waiting for the right person. Nathan had a first wife, and she had sat in this same hospital, or one just like it, with this same pattern of bones, broken and healing and broken again. And I had never known. 3 years. 3 years I had been inside what he was doing, and the whole time there was a woman named Rebecca somewhere who had survived the same thing before me, or hadn't. The thought stopped my breath. Is she alive?" I asked. "She is," Dr. Webb said. "She relocated after the divorce. My colleague lost contact with her when she moved, but we're working with the police to find her tonight." His voice was gentle but urgent. "Emily, if Rebecca Calloway is willing to come forward, and if her testimony can be combined with yours and with the medical records from both cases, this is no longer just one incident on one night. This is a pattern. This is a documented history, and that changes everything about the case." I sat at that table with the phone pressed against my ear and my hand flat on the surface in front of me, and I thought about a woman I had never met named Rebecca. I thought about her sitting in a bathroom covering a bruise. I thought about her believing an apology. I thought about her building her world smaller and smaller until Nathan filled all of it. I thought about everything she had survived before me, everything she had lived through, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt found. Not fixed, not finished, not healed, but found. Like someone had finally turned on a light in a room I'd been sitting in the dark for years, and there were other people in it, and we had all been reaching toward each other without knowing it. "Find her," I said. "Please, find her." They found Rebecca Calloway in Portland, Oregon, 41 hours after Dr. Webb made that call. I know the exact number because I counted them. 41 hours of sitting in my mother's house in Colorado Springs. She had driven me down the morning after the shelter, packed me into her car with Carla riding shotgun, and the three of us barely speaking the whole 2 hours because there wasn't language yet for the size of what had happened. 41 hours of sleeping in the yellow curtain bedroom and waking up in the night reaching for a threat that wasn't there anymore. 41 hours of my mother appearing quietly at the door with tea and not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. Officer Perez called me at 7:14 in the morning. I was already awake. I had been awake since 5. "We found her," she said. I sat up so fast my ribs screamed. "Is she okay? Did she talk to you?" "She talked to us." A pause that contained something I couldn't read yet. Emily Rebecca Calloway has been living under a different name for the past 11 months. She relocated specifically to make it harder for Nathan to find her. When our officer in Portland made contact, she thought it was Nathan somehow. She barricaded herself in her apartment and called her own attorney before she would open the door. Another pause. That tells you something. It told me everything. It told me that Rebecca had spent 11 months being afraid, even after she got away checking over her shoulder, changing her name, building a new life around the architecture of someone who was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. It told me that escape and safety were not the same thing, and that what Nathan did to a person didn't stop when they walked out the door. But she talked to them, I said. After she opened the door, she talked. She talked for 3 hours. Officer Perez said, and this time I could hear it clearly, that quiet professional satisfaction from the night she arrested Nathan. Emily Rebecca's account and your account match in ways that they're significant, not just the physical pattern. The language he used, the specific phrases, the cycle. She described things that you described to me almost word for word, and she has been separated from you for 2 years. She let that land. He has a script. He has been running the same script, and now we have 2 women who can prove it. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Not from grief this time. From something that was grief's strange cousin. The emotion you feel when you realize you were not crazy. You were not imagining it. You were not uniquely broken or uniquely stupid. You were targeted by someone who had done this before and knew exactly how to do it, and had done it so precisely that 2 women 1,000 miles apart could describe it in nearly identical words. What happens now? I asked. The DA is filing additional charges this morning. With Rebecca's testimony combined with yours and the medical documentation from both cases, we're looking at felony assault charges, habitual offender consideration, and potentially more depending on what comes out of the financial investigation. She paused. Which brings me to the other thing I need to tell you. Patricia Cho filed for discovery on the safety deposit box yesterday afternoon. The judge signed off on it this morning. We're opening it today. The key. The watch box. Nathan's voice for emergencies. Everything important is in there, coming back to me across 2 years with a different weight entirely now. Do you know what's in it? I asked. Not yet, she said. But Emily, the fact that he had a defense attorney's card ready, the fact that he kept a safety deposit box that he never disclosed to you as a marital asset, the fact that he had done this before and moved seamlessly into the same pattern with you, this is not a man who lost his temper. This is a man who made choices, deliberate, calculated choices, and a jury is going to understand the difference. After she hung up, I sat on the edge of the yellow curtain bed and stared at the floor for a long time. My mother knocked once and came in and sat beside me without asking anything, and I leaned against her shoulder the way I hadn't since I was maybe 12 years old, and she put her arm around me carefully, mindful of my ribs, and we sat there together in the early morning quiet. They found his first wife, I said. She's going to testify. My mother's arm tightened slightly. Good, she said. Just that. Good. In the tone of a woman who had spent 48 hours maintaining a composure that was costing her significantly and had just been given one solid piece of ground to stand on. That afternoon, Patricia Cho called back. Her voice, already crisp, had sharpened into something else entirely. The safety deposit box, she said without preamble. Emily, I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because some of it is going to be difficult to hear, and some of it is going to be important for your case, and I need you to hold both of those things at once. Okay, I said. My hands had gone cold. The box contained standard documents, property deeds, his will, insurance policies. But it also contained a prepaid cell phone. Our forensic team is working on it now, but there were messages accessible on the home screen. Messages to a number we've identified as belonging to a woman named Joanna Sims. A pause. Emily Joanna Sims is a woman Nathan has been seeing for approximately 7 months. The messages indicate that she knew about you. They indicate that he had been planning in his words to resolve the situation, and that Joanna had been actively encouraging this. The room went very quiet around me, not the quiet of the shelter, not the quiet of my mother's house. The specific airless quiet of a revelation landing. 7 months. He had been seeing someone for 7 months, which meant I ran the math automatically helplessly, which meant the night he broke my ribs was not a man losing his temper over dry chicken. It was something else, something with direction and intention, resolving the situation. "What does that mean?" I asked. My voice sounded very far away. "Resolve the situation, what does that mean?" "We don't know yet," Patricia said, and the careful, precise way she said it told me that they had some ideas and were not ready to share them. "What I can tell you is that the DA has been notified and the investigation has expanded. Joanna Sims is being interviewed today." Another pause. "Emily, are you all right?" Was I all right? I almost laughed. "No," I said honestly, "but keep going." "There's one more thing in the box, a life insurance policy, taken out 14 months ago just after his divorce from Rebecca was finalized. The policy is on your life, Emily. He is the sole beneficiary. The payout is $400,000. The cold in my hands spread up my arms and settled in my chest. 14 months ago, Nathan had taken out a $400,000 life insurance policy on my life 14 months ago and kept it in a locked safety deposit box that he had never mentioned to me. 14 months ago, we had still been in the part of the cycle where he apologized with flowers. 14 months ago, I had still believed some mornings that things might get better. "Patricia," I said, and my voice came out remarkably steady, given that the world was rearranging itself around me again. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "I'm telling you," she said carefully, "that the DA is treating this as an active and serious investigation with a potentially broader scope than the original assault charges. And I'm telling you that the fact that you are alive and sitting in your mother's house and talking to me right now is something I want you to sit with for a moment." I sat with it. The weight of it was extraordinary. Not just the fear, though the fear was there, a cold and nauseating thing, but the particular surreal quality of understanding that you had been standing closer to an edge than you knew, that the story you had been living had contained a chapter you didn't know about, a chapter with your name in it, and an ending you had narrowly missed. I thought about that evening, the argument over dinner, the dry chicken Nathan standing up from the table. I had told myself afterward, even in the hospital, even while giving my statement, that it had escalated out of control, that his temper had gotten the better of him. But what if it hadn't been his temper? What if I had finally said the wrong thing on the wrong night to a man who had a plan and a policy and a woman named Joanna waiting, and I had simply pushed the timeline up? What if I had not fainted? What if I had lost consciousness and not regained it? My mother came into the room during that call. She had heard something in my voice from the hallway. I think that pulled her in. She sat down across from me and watched my face while Patricia finished speaking. And by the time I hung up, my mother had worked out enough from my expression to understand that what we were dealing with had changed shape significantly. I told her everything. I watched her face move through things I didn't have names for. When I got to the life insurance policy, she stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to me for a long moment, and when she turned around, her face was the face of a woman who had just understood the full size of what she had almost lost. "Emily," she said. "I know," I said. She came back and sat down and took both my hands in both of hers and held on in a way that made her knuckles go white, and neither of us said anything else for a while because there wasn't anything to say that was equal to it. The trial preparation consumed the next 4 months of my life. That is the part they never show you in movies, the aftermath, which is not dramatic in the way that Crisis is dramatic. It is paperwork and depositions and long phone calls with Patricia and sessions with a therapist named Dr. Grace Okafor, who my mother found and who sat across from me twice a week in a small office and said things that were so accurate and so precisely targeted at the specific damage Nathan had done that sometimes I had to stop and just breathe for a minute before I could keep going. It was Dr. Okafor who first used the word trauma with me in a clinical way, not as a descriptor, but as a diagnosis. "What you're experiencing," she said, in the 3rd week when I described waking at 3 a.m. with my heart rate already at a sprint, "is your nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. You spent 3 years in a state of constant threat. Your brain learned to stay at high alert. It doesn't know the threat is gone yet. We have to teach it. Oh, we have to teach it. As if the fear were a student. As if the body were something that could be retrained with enough patience and the right approach. I found that idea that the damage was not permanent, that it could be worked with, shaped, redirected, more hopeful than almost anything else anyone said to me in those 4 months. Rebecca contacted me 6 weeks after the police found her in Portland. I had known she might reach out. Officer Perez had told me Rebecca had asked about me, whether I was safe, whether I had somewhere to go. But when the message actually came, I sat with my phone for 20 minutes before I could open it. It said, "Emily, I know this is strange. I've been thinking about how to say this for weeks. I just want you to know that I believe you completely, and I'm not going to disappear. I'm going to be there when it counts. I'm sorry it took 2 of us. It should have stopped with me. Rebecca." I read it 5 times. Then I wrote back, "It should have stopped with you, but I'm glad you're still here to stand next to me. Thank you." She responded with just "together then." Together. Rebecca and I spoke on the phone for the first time 11 days before the trial started. I hadn't known what to expect, whether it would be painful or awkward or too raw to manage, and it was all of those things, but it was also something else. There was an ease to talking to her that I had not anticipated, the ease of 2 people who do not have to explain the basic architecture of their experience to each other, who can speak shorthand about things that would take hours to translate for someone on the outside. She told me about the night she left Nathan. She had not been brought to a hospital the way I had. She had walked out on her own, or rather, she had waited until he fell asleep, after the worst night of their marriage, packed one bag with the specific focused calm of someone who has made a final irrevocable decision and driven to a gas station 3 miles away and called her sister from a payphone. "I didn't even have my wallet," she said. "I had my car keys and my sister's phone number memorized. That was it." "Were you scared?" I asked. "I was the most scared I have ever been in my life," she said. And then, about 20 miles down the highway, I realized I was also more free than I had ever been, and both of those things were true at the same time, which I was not prepared for. I understood that exactly. The fear and the freedom occupying the same space, the same breath, neither canceling the other out. "Did you ever think about going back?" I asked. A pause. "Once," she said. "About 2 weeks after I left, when the adrenaline wore off and the reality of starting over hit me. I thought about it, but then I thought about which version of going back was even possible, whether the man I was missing was the real man or the performance, and I knew the answer, and that was that." The trial started on a Thursday in October. I sat in the front row of the gallery with my mother on one side and Carla on the other, and Patricia Cho was at the prosecutor's table. She had worked in close coordination with the DA's office, which was unusual, but the complexity of the case had warranted it. And Nathan was at the defense table with the attorney from the business card in his wallet, and it was the first time I had seen Nathan since the hospital. I had spent weeks preparing myself for that moment. Dr. Okafor and I had talked through it, specifically rehearsed the breathing techniques, built a plan for managing my nervous system's inevitable response. I knew exactly what I was going to do when I saw him. What I actually did was nothing. I looked at him and felt less than I expected. Not nothing, but less. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was the same height, the same build, but something about the specific setting, the courtroom, the context, the fact that he was sitting there subject to the same processes as everyone else stripped from him, the quality that had made him so large in my life. He was just a man in a chair, a man who had made choices, a man who was about to be held accountable for them. He looked at me once across the courtroom. A flat, assessing look, the same look he used to give me over the breakfast table, while calculating whether I had done something worth being angry about. And I held his gaze. I did not look away. And after a moment, he did. That small moment, that 2-second exchange, was the first time in 4 years that I had looked Nathan Calloway in the face and not felt afraid. I held that in my chest the way I had held the "not this time" in the back of his car, like something small and hard and absolutely mine. The prosecution's opening was meticulous and controlled. The DA walked the jury through the medical records, the photographic documentation, the timeline that linked my injuries to Rebecca's injuries, to the pattern the forensic expert would testify to. She talked about the safety deposit box. She talked about the life insurance policy. She talked about a man who had built across 2 marriages a system of control so deliberate and so consistent that it constituted not crimes of passion, but crimes of premeditation. Then she said, "The state will call 2 witnesses whose testimony taken together will show you not an accident, not a loss of control, but a choice, made again and again, by a man who believed he would never face consequences." She paused. He was wrong. Nathan's attorney gave his opening and used the word volatile 3 times in relation to me and the word unstable twice, and I sat in the gallery and breathed slowly and let Carla's hand in mine be the anchor it had always been when I remembered to reach for it. What broke the defense's entire strategy happened on the 4th day of trial, and it did not come from me or from Rebecca or from any witness the prosecution had planned. It came from a woman who walked into the courthouse on her own unscheduled and asked to speak with the district attorney. Her name was Joanna Sims, the woman who had been texting Nathan about resolving the situation, the woman who had known about me for 7 months, the woman who had been, I had assumed, Nathan's accomplice, his audience, his partner in what he had been planning. That woman walked into the DA's office and said she wanted to make a statement. I didn't find out until after it happened. Patricia Cho called me that evening, and her voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. A quality that was almost startled, as if even Patricia, who had seen a great deal and was rarely surprised by any of it, had been caught off guard by this particular development. "Joanna Sims came in today," she said. "She had been dating Nathan for 7 months. She knew about you. She thought he was in the process of separating from you, that the marriage was over. He told her you were unstable and dangerous, and that he was trying to manage a difficult divorce." A pause. "She did not know what he was doing to you, Emily. She had no idea. When the police contacted her for an interview after the safety deposit box, she started asking questions. She started digging. And what she found..." Patricia paused again. "What she found was that Nathan had taken out a second life insurance policy, not on you, on her." The silence on my end of the phone was absolute. "He had done the same thing to her," I said slowly. "He was running the same..." "He had 2 women," Patricia said. "He had you, who he had been working on for 3 years, and he had her, who he had been positioning as the next, and both of you had policies on your lives, and he had an attorney's card in his wallet." Her voice was as controlled as always, but something underneath it had gone to a different temperature entirely. "Joanna Sims came in today because she is terrified, and she is angry, and she wants to testify against him." I sat in my mother's kitchen with the phone against my ear and the overhead light very bright, and my mother watching me from across the table with that careful, steadfast expression she had been holding together for months. And I thought about Joanna Sims walking into a courthouse alone, driven by fear and fury, to do something brave for herself and accidentally for me. "Will it help the case?" I asked. "Emily," Patricia said, and I could hear underneath the professional precision something that was almost satisfaction, the deep, structural kind, the kind that comes from justice moving in the right direction after significant effort. "It doesn't just help the case, it ends it." Joanna Sims took the stand on the 6th day of trial. I had not met her before that moment. I had constructed her in my mind over the weeks between Patricia's phone call and the trial's continuation, a villain. Mostly because it was easier to have a villain than to sit with the complicated truth that she had been another target, another woman. Nathan had been running his script on while I was still inside mine. But when she walked to the stand and I saw her, a woman about my age, dark-haired, with the particular controlled composure of someone managing significant fear in a public setting, the villain dissolved. What was left was something I recognized completely. The set of her jaw, the way she held her hands very still in her lap, the way her eyes moved once to Nathan and then away deliberately, the way you look away from something that has hurt you and that you are no longer willing to give the power of your attention. She looked like me. Not physically, but in the way that mattered. She testified for 2 hours. Her voice was steady through most of it and broke twice, once when she described the moment she found the insurance policy with her name on it, and once when the prosecutor asked her directly, "Ms. Sims, when you received those messages from Nathan Calloway about resolving the situation with his wife, what did you understand that to mean?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I thought he meant divorce. I told myself that's what it meant. But when I found the policy—" She stopped, steadied. "When I found the policy, I understood what he had meant. And I understood that I was next." The jury box was very quiet. Nathan's attorney cross-examined her hard. He went after her credibility, her timeline, the 7 months of messages, the fact that she had knowingly been involved with a married man. Joanna took every question without flinching. She answered directly. And at one point, when the defense attorney suggested that she was testifying out of personal vendetta, she looked at him with an expression so clear and so unafraid that several jurors visibly reacted to it. "I'm testifying," she said, "because he had a policy on my life, and I want to come home tonight." You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. My mother grabbed my hand beside me. Carla grabbed the other one. I sat between the two of them and breathed and let the moment be what it was. I testified the following morning. Dr. Okafor and I had prepared for this across dozens of sessions. She had walked me through the process, the pacing, the specific challenge of being cross-examined by someone whose job was to dismantle your credibility without appearing to bully a woman who had been visibly injured by the man on trial. I knew the theory. I knew the breathing techniques. I knew to speak to the jury, not to Nathan. What I did not know until I was sitting in that chair with my hand raised and the courtroom waiting was how it would feel to be asked to tell the truth in public after years of being required to lie. The answer was enormous. It felt enormous. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my fractured ribs, which had healed by then, but had left a sensitivity that showed up under stress. The prosecutor started gently and built slowly, and I told the story. The same story I had told Diane, told Officer Perez, told my mother, told Dr. Okafor. But this time, with the specific weight of a room full of strangers who were listening with the power to decide what happened next. I talked about the coffee, the first time. I talked about the apology with flowers. I talked about the cycle repeating and tightening and the way the apologies changed. I talked about Carla, about my mother, about the world getting smaller. I talked about the morning of the last night standing at the bathroom mirror with the makeup sponge shaking in my hand. I talked about what I remembered of the blows and what I remembered of the floor and what I heard in the car on the way to the hospital. When I said that part, Nathan's voice rehearsing in the front seat. The stairs keep it simple. She's clumsy. Everyone knows she's clumsy. I heard something move through the jury box. Not a sound exactly, a shift. The particular quality of 12 people recalibrating. Then Nathan's attorney stood up for cross-examination, and he was good. I'll give him that. He was methodical and precise, and he came at me from angles I had partially prepared for my emotional state, the times I had told the lie myself, the years of emergency room records that didn't exist, because I had never sought treatment, which he framed not as evidence that I had hidden the abuse, but as doubt that it had occurred at the frequency I described. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, "isn't it true that in 3 years of marriage you never once called the police?" "Yes," I said. "Isn't it true that you told multiple people, friends, family members, co-workers, that your injuries were the result of accidents?" "Yes." "Isn't it true that you continued to live with my client voluntarily throughout this period?" "Yes." He paused for effect. Let the 3 yeses sit there for the jury to weigh. Then I said, without being prompted, without the prosecutor objecting or redirecting, in the steady voice I had found somewhere in the last 4 months, and was not going to relinquish, "I told those lies because I was afraid. I stayed because I was afraid. Every woman in that situation is afraid, and the fear is not evidence that the abuse didn't happen. It's evidence of how effective the abuse was." The attorney blinked. He hadn't expected that. He moved to his next question, but the moment had already happened. I watched 2 jurors in the second row write something down. I didn't know what, but they wrote it. Rebecca testified the afternoon of the same day. I was back in the gallery by then, and I watched her walk to the stand. This woman I had spoken to on the phone, whose text I had read a dozen times, who had said together then, and she was composed in a way that I knew from personal experience, was costing her. She sat down, and she looked out at the courtroom, and her eyes found mine for just a moment before she turned to face the jury. She testified for 90 minutes. Her voice didn't break once. She described her marriage with the particular precision of someone who has had a long time to organize the story and is finally in a room where the organization serves a purpose. She described the same phrases Nathan had used on her that he had used on me, the same escalation pattern, the same apology cycle. And then she said something that I had not heard before, something she had not told me in our phone call, something that landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. After I left, she said, I filed a police report in this city 14 months before Emily and Nathan were married. She paused. Nothing happened. The case was reviewed and closed for insufficient evidence. Nathan was never charged. She looked directly at the jury. Emily was married to him 9 months after that report was filed and closed. If it had gone differently, she would never have been in that house. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I felt it hit my chest like a physical thing. A police report. Filed. Closed. 9 months before our wedding. I had been standing at the altar on that Saturday in June, with the string lights and the sunflowers already inside, a story that had a documented past, already carrying a risk that the system had assessed and set down. I had not known. I could not have known. But someone had known, and the knowing had led nowhere, and I had walked into the gap it left. My mother's hand found mine in the gallery. She had heard it too. Nathan's attorney did not cross-examine Rebecca for long. There was not much he could do with her. She was calm, specific, consistent, and utterly unshakable. And every minute he kept her on the stand was another minute the jury spent looking at her and understanding exactly what they were looking at. Closing arguments were the following day. The DA was precise and devastating. She walked the jury through the totality of what they had heard: 2 women, 1 pattern, 1 policy, 1 attorney card, and she described Nathan not as a man with a temper, but as a man with a system. A man who had selected his targets, built trust, isolated them, hurt them with increasing severity, and prepared for the legal consequences the entire time. She described the insurance policies as the most clarifying detail in the entire case because they answered the question that the defense had been trying to raise. This was not uncontrolled. This was not passion. This was intention. The defendant, she said near the end, has sat in this courtroom for 7 days watching 2 women tell the truth about him in public, something he spent years ensuring they would never do. The fact that they are here, that they are alive, that they are speaking, that is not inevitable. That is the result of 1 woman on 1 night in 1 hospital room making a decision to stop protecting a man who had never once protected her. She looked at the jury. Hold him accountable for that. Hold him accountable for all of it. The jury deliberated for 9 hours across 2 days. I know exactly how those 9 hours felt because I lived every minute of them in my mother's kitchen in Colorado Springs, waiting for Patricia's call, eating food. I couldn't taste while my mother and Carla filled the silence with conversation that neither of them was actually tracking. Carla at one point looked at me across the table and said, "No matter what they decide, Emily, you still did it. You still told the truth. That doesn't go away." "I know," I said. "Do you actually know that, or are you just saying it?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm working on knowing it," I said. "I know it more today than I did 4 months ago." She nodded. "That's enough." Patricia called at 4 in the afternoon on the second day of deliberations. I answered before the first ring finished. "They have a verdict," she said. We drove back to Denver. My mother and Carla and I, the same configuration as the night we drove down, but moving in the opposite direction now towards something instead of away. I don't remember what we talked about in the car. I remember that at some point my mother started crying quietly and then stopped and apologized. And I said, "Don't apologize." And she said, "I just keep thinking about what could have happened." And I said, "I know, but it didn't. and she nodded and drove. The courtroom was fuller than it had been during the trial. Word had gotten out the way it does. I sat in the front row between my mother and Carla, and I breathed slowly, and I kept my eyes forward. Nathan was brought in. He looked at the jury as they filed in. He did not look at me. The foreperson stood. The judge asked for the verdict. Guilty of aggravated assault in the first degree. Guilty of aggravated assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. Guilty of criminal threatening. And then the charge that Patricia had told me was possible but not certain. The charge that the DA had built the insurance policies toward the charge that required the jury to believe not just what Nathan had done, but what he had been preparing to do, guilty of attempted murder in the second degree. Guilty, 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 guilty. I sat completely still through everyone. I had told myself I would stay composed. I had prepared for this the way I had prepared for testifying with intention and structure and a plan for my own reactions. And then the foreperson said guilty the fourth time, and something in my chest that had been braced for 4 months, that had been braced honestly for 3 years before, that simply let go. Not dramatically, not with a sound, just released. Like a hand that had been gripping something for so long, it had forgotten what open felt like, finally quietly opening. My mother was crying. Carla had both hands pressed over her mouth. I sat between them and felt the release move through me and thought about Diane in the hospital room saying, "You are safe in this building." I thought about Dr. Webb's voice, not all of them recent, and what it had felt like to be seen as a record, a documented history, something real that could not be explained away. I thought about Rebecca saying together then, and about Joanna Sims walking into a courthouse alone, with fear in her chest and a truth she needed to tell. I thought about Officer Perez's quiet professional satisfaction. I thought about the radiology technician who had squeezed my hand in the dark and said, "Honey, you don't have to protect him." I thought about Nathan rehearsing in the front seat of his car and the small, hard stone of "not this time" that I had locked in my chest on that drive, and how I had carried it all the way here. Nathan was sentenced 6 weeks later. 22 years with the possibility of parole reviewed at 18. He stood at the defense table and heard it with the flat expression of a man whose calculations had finally irrevocably failed, and then he was taken from the room and I watched him go, and I did not feel the things I expected to feel. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel relief exactly, though relief was in there somewhere underneath. What I felt most of all was done. Like a chapter ending with all its loose ends tied the way good chapters should. Rebecca and I met in person for the first time the day after sentencing. We had agreed to meet for coffee, just the two of us. No attorneys, no police officers, no support network. Just us. She walked in and we looked at each other, and it was strange and entirely natural at the same time. We hugged like two people who have been through something together without being in the same room, which is exactly what we were. We sat across from each other and drank our coffee and talked for 3 hours. About what was next. She had rebuilt her life in Portland into something she was genuinely proud of. A small business, an apartment she loved, a friend group she had cultivated slowly and with intention. She talked about it with the specific satisfaction of someone who had built something themselves with their own hands out of the rubble of something that had been meant to be permanent. "Does it go away?" I asked her. "The reflex, the waking up at 3 a.m. "It gets quieter," she said. "I still have bad nights, but they're not every night anymore. And when they happen, I know now that they end. That's the part that takes the longest learning, that the hard moments end. That they don't mean you're back there. They're just echoes. Echoes get quieter over time. Echoes get quieter over time." I held that the way I had held the other things that had gotten me through Diane's hand, Carla's laugh, the key to the shelter room, the sound of 4 guilty verdicts in a Denver courtroom. I went back to Denver 3 months after the sentencing. Not to the house was gone, handled in the divorce proceedings, and I was glad not to have to make any decisions about it. I went back to Denver because Denver was, my city had been my city for 7 years before Nathan and I was not willing to let him have it. I found an apartment, a 1-bedroom with a good window and a kitchen I liked. I put my name on the lease, and it was only my name, and I stood in that empty apartment on the first day and thought about the yellow curtain bedroom and how I had needed it and how I didn't need it anymore. I called Priya that afternoon. The colleague who had messaged me about the client 2 years ago, the message I had never answered. I told her I was sorry for the silence. I told her I was back. She said, without any of the hesitation I had been afraid of, "Emily, I've got 2 clients right now who need exactly what you do. When can we talk?" I started therapy again with a new therapist in Denver, a man named Dr. Ellis, who had a direct manner and a good laugh, and who told me in the second session when I apologized for crying, "You never have to apologize for crying in here. That's what here is for." I started volunteering with a domestic violence organization 6 months after moving back. Not because anyone told me to, not because I thought I was supposed to, but because I sat in an orientation meeting and listened to the coordinator describe the work and felt something click in my chest, the way things click when you understand exactly where you are supposed to be. I started as a crisis line volunteer. Then I started speaking at events at universities, at community organizations. I told my story. The same story I have been telling you, and every time I told it, it changed slightly because the person telling it was changing, becoming more herself, becoming piece by piece the woman she had been before, and more than that, someone new. Someone the woman before could not have anticipated. I heard from Joanna Sims last spring. She had moved out of Denver, rebuilt elsewhere, was doing well. She ended her message the same way Rebecca had ended hers all those months ago. "Thank you for going first," she wrote. "Because of you, I knew I could." I read that message, and I thought about all the small choices that had led to that sentence, keeping my eyes closed in the back of a moving car, saying not this time to no one but myself, whispering the truth to a social worker in a hospital room, all the times I had been terrified and had done the thing anyway because the alternative was a life I was no longer willing to accept. I am 36 years old. I have fractured ribs that healed completely, and a career that is growing, and a best friend who answers the phone on the first ring, and a mother who calls me every Sunday, and this time when she calls, I tell her the truth about how I am, and sometimes the truth is hard, and sometimes it is genuinely good, and I no longer have to choose between the two. The scars are there. They will always be there, but they are mine. All of it is mine now, the story, the surviving, the living that comes after. Every morning I wake up in my own apartment in my own city, and I do not lie still listening for footsteps. I do not read the quality of silence for threat. I make coffee, and I breathe, and the breath goes all the way in and all the way out, and there is no stone behind my sternum. There is just me, and that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.